Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. I'm your host, Janice, the human behind Cozy Rock Cabin, and each week we explore the stories, insights, and inspirations from others in the cabin community. Today, we have an incredible conversation with Jandy, a seasoned host who, along with her husband Dave, has beautifully navigated the journey from long-term rentals to short-term rentals on the coast to now creating a retreat in Banner Elk, North Carolina with several high-end cabins on one property and still building. Jandy and her husband Dave have tackled it all, learned a ton from the challenges along the way, and are here today to share those with you so that others can find success in their own cabin journeys. We're going to explore her insights on building, managing, and thriving in the cabin rental business, and even talk build cost, the question everyone in the dreaming stage is asking. Okay, let's do it. It's so good to meet you.
You too.
I'm really excited to chat. One, because you're doing something that I think a lot of folks who listen to the podcast dream about doing. But two, because you're located in Banner Elk, which is so close to where my very first cabin is.
I know. Yeah.
Where in Banner Elk are you?
So it's at the corner of, sort of near the corner of 105 and Broadstone.
Yeah.
So there's just this little mountain community up there that not a lot of people seem to know about even. But it's kind of sleepy, which I like.
Yeah.
But which also means that there are residents there who were not excited about what we were doing. So.
Oh, I have questions about that. When we get to hosting, I definitely want to hear about that, because the same thing happened to me in Boone. Even though I was in a neighborhood where like 15 out of 18 of the houses were rentals, it just so happened my next door neighbor was not a rental and they were full-time owners and not happy about it.
Oh, yeah.
So I do think that's an art form in itself, how you build relationships with neighbors and cultivate guests that take care of and respect your neighbors and community.
Yeah, 100%. We went to the POA meetings. We went to like the cleanup day, like the road cleanup day. I mean, not only do we want to be a part of it because we love that area and we truly want to be at home there and make it our home later on when we can do that. But it just helped for them to settle any rumors, because some people were like, they're building a mansion up there, or one person said that we're building like 9 houses, which is not even true. Like, we can't even build 9 houses there. Yeah. But it's just like this nervousness over the thought of an Airbnb and the negative things that come along with that. But my one neighbor who was there, who was across from one of our cabins, she is there part-time, and she said that because I asked her, and I try to, I bring her cinnamon rolls and I say, what's going on? Is there anything we need to change? Is there anything we need to do? We want to be respectful neighbors. And she's like, well, if we didn't see cars there, we'd never know you had guests. So,
oh, that's so nice. And she's closest.
Yeah, she's right across, kind of this little log cabin tucked away. So it's not even that you can see everything that's around. There's a few cabins right around our first 2 cabins, but you never really see anybody. So that's kind of nice. It's kind of private in that way.
Right. Yeah. Let's back up a little bit. Where do you live and why the mountains of North Carolina? How did that start for you?
We live south of Raleigh, and it just, the first time we visited Banner Elk and Boone, we were just like, yeah, this is our vibe. Yeah. Asheville's beautiful. That area is beautiful, but it's sort of more match our personality of what we like. We're okay if there's not a ton of entertainment or commercialized things to do. That's totally fine with us. And same with our beach locations too. We're on Holden Beach, and it's just a really low key family vibe, and that's what we prefer. So
yeah. Now your rentals, you started with the beach, right? I mean, literally in North Carolina, for anyone who's not in North Carolina, a lot of folks live in the center of the state, which is, I live right outside Durham, but then a lot of people have preferences. I'm either a beach person or a mountain person, and you're like right in the middle of both of them. You're like 2.5 hours from each. So did you start with the beach rental and then go to the mountains?
So our first rental, we actually started with a long-term rental. So we have 4 long-term rentals. That's where we started. That was like where the mindset shift started happening on, how do we get off this hamster wheel of life that most people are on?
Mm-hmm.
And so we purchased some long-term rentals just in our neighborhood. Wonderful families living there. We decided, let's do something at the beach. It was really scary. But once we did that one, we built another beach house after that with a family member, part owners. And then we decided to go to the mountains because we love to be in the mountains. And we hadn't been to that area yet. We'd been to Asheville a lot. But once we went there, we were like, oh, yeah, we've got to buy some
Yeah.
land here. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love what you said in your pre-interview. You said it was a slow awakening that the way in which most people think about work and money comes from a place of fear
Mm-hmm.
of departing from the status quo. And I think that's so right. And I think even my own family has looked at me a little crazy because I'm the only one in my family who's ever really invested in real estate in a way that has been not about a second home. Like my uncle has built a second home, but it was never rented or anything. So I'm curious, how did that slow awakening happen for you to get away? Because I think a lot of people listening might have the dream, but it's overruled by the fear. So how did you overcome that?
Yeah. So actually, when I was 29 years old, my father passed away in a car accident, and he was 55, and it really impacted me so much because I thought to myself, wow, he was a locksmith. He worked super hard. He and my mom built this wonderful business together. Um, and she did half of it. He did the service call type half of it. And he worked, I mean, he was 24/7 on call for so many years when I was young. And I just think about he sold this business, and then just a few years later, he never really truly got to live his retirement and what he'd worked so hard for. Part of what he
Yeah.
worked hard for was to raise us, which we're grateful for. And we had this wonderful childhood because of him and my
Right.
mom. But that just really brought it to me, to my thought process of how am I living my life and raising my kids, and what am I showing them, and just realize that there is this hamster wheel that most people live on of working a 9 to 5 and hoping one day possibly to be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor if they're healthy enough, if they work hard
Yeah.
enough, if they save enough.
Yeah.
And my husband agreed, and he had his own awakening in his own way with it. And that's when we decided to buy our first rental. We have always, from day one, lived off of my husband's W-2 income. So for the last 10 years, we have reinvested every penny of what we've made on our properties. In the beginning, it was just it was like a few $100s a month we were making. It wasn't a lot at all, but over time, it really, you feel like you're plateaued, and all of a sudden, one day you realize that you've jumped up, to this new category of investing, when things appreciate, when rents go up and all that. So, just over the last 10 years, we've averaged about or building about a property a year. And just during that time, just kind of keeping our head, we drive old cars,
Mm-hmm.
we just save and put all that to work for us so that we can accelerate that, time in our lives that we can do what we want to do. And it's just about
Mm-hmm.
freedom.
Mm-hmm. When did you make the jump from long-term rentals to short-term rentals? Because I also have both, and I know that the revenue is a lot better for short-term rentals, but the
Mm-hmm.
risk is higher because long-term
Definitely.
rentals, you have someone in there for like a year-long lease. So it makes sense to me that if you're overcoming that fear that a long-term rental is like a place to start, you need to find one tenant for
Yeah,
a year.
right.
When did you get to become comfortable enough with that you were like, I think we'll try short-term rental? And like, what introduced you to that?
We just kind of thought if we could have a beach house and it could pay for itself and we could raise our kids going there, right? That was
Yeah.
the beginning of it. Um, we had no clue. We had no mentors along the way. We just learned everything kind of the hard way. We did ask a lot of questions. I just asked like anybody who would answer a question, I just asked them a question. And that's why
Same.
like when people ask me questions, I really try to answer them because there were, several people on our journey who would answer questions and they didn't have to talk to me, and a stranger and give me information. But We just, it was the real estate, the long-term real estate was appreciating. And at one point we were just thinking, it's too expensive now, which at the time, like looking back now, we wish we'd kept buying long-term rentals, but hindsight's 2020. We learned
Yep.
along the way.
Yep.
So at that point, after things started picking up, as far as the prices in our area, we decided to do the short term rental. And once we saw the difference in what we could make there, we just decided to keep going because everything just kept appreciating year over
Right.
year. So.
Right. Were you working full time at that point? Because the other downside, I mean, the revenue is great, but but there is risk and it's a lot more hands on. Were you managing the short term rentals, or did you use a property management company?
I've always managed them. I've stayed home with our kids and worked part time at home.
Okay.
Um, I homeschool now, so I'm even
So that's a
busier
full
with our
time job.
builds and all this stuff. So I feel like in the last last 2 years between our builds and beginning to homeschool, I've gained like 2 jobs.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we just tried to be frugal, live off of my husband's W-2, and I manage that way. I could manage everything and be home
Yep.
with our kids. So
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk specifically. I love that you started long-term rental and then the beach and then came to the mountains. But I do kind of want to talk specifically about out of bounds retreat because I feel like this is a question that a lot of people are grappling with. A lot of our listeners who did make the jump and have one cabin and they're like, wow, I'm seeing the money that we can make off of this. I'm seeing how much I like it. Maybe I should start thinking about a second one. And you went from one to how many do you have now? Can you talk about the vision for the land that you bought and like, because this feels like the next step for you. Like you went from long term, short term, but now kind of like a piece of land with several short term rentals. Tell us about that vision and what's coming next and where you're at now within that.
yeah, so we bought 7 acres in Banner Elk, and we subdivided it, and we've built 2 couples retreats, so tiny cabins. We just only sleep 2. And we're building an A-frame right now that will sleep probably 6 to 8. It kind of will depend on our septic for that. And
So
then we're
big A-frame.
building, yes. And then we're building, and that one's like 1,700 square feet. And then we're building a last couples retreat
Okay.
at the same time. Well, not really at the same time because we just got our permit for that and we've had the loan for over a year. So that's a whole other thing. But it's
And
part
those
of
are all on that one
part of
piece of
developing.
7 acres.
Right, right.
Okay.
So out of bounds is really like the vision of it is, to kind of live out of the bounds of the normal, which is exiting that hamster wheel. And I feel like people can do that, a weekend at a time at our place. And I think that's so important to step away from real life for a little bit. So that's out of bounds. The vision is to have all of them sort of able to be booked together for families. We would love that. We bought another 8-acre property. We plan to do 6 more units on. And that is sort of coming together right now as far as getting engineering done on that land and subdividing and maybe starting a road in this year for that property. But hoping that the last 2 cabins on this first property will be done late this year, early the next year. So
Okay. So seeing that you're like 2.5, I guess you're probably closer to 3 hours
3 years,
away.
yeah, 3 hours away. Mm-hmm.
So being 3 hours away, like what is your role in the build? How hands-on are you? Are you project managing? Do you have a GC? How have you been able to do this from 3 hours away?
Yeah, it's not been easy 3 hours away. We definitely could not have done it without a GC, which we have. So we chose a small local builder there. He's just one GC. He doesn't have his own subs, which, has its perks and its drawbacks. But he manages everything for us. I do the designing. We designed everything with architects. We did use a Den Outdoors plan for our cabin too.
Okay.
But I do all of the managing as far as bookings and all that for the
Yeah.
guests. Just kind of like anything and everything that needs to be done. But we haven't been able to go and do except for like after the fact, like doing some landscaping, that sort of thing. We don't have time to go and do work on the cabin.
Right. Okay, so this is a question I think a lot of people grapple with, like, when can I afford to do this? And when can I afford to make a jump that might be more than a couple? And I saw a YouTube short of yours that was talking about financing, and you were like, don't let that get in the way. There's always creative ways to finance. Can you talk to someone who hears, like, oh my gosh, like 2 beach houses, 4 in the mountains, another 6 more coming? Like, they must be cajillionaires to be able to do all this. But my guess is that it's, to your point earlier, a little bit of frugality, a little bit of intentionality, and a little bit of creativity with your financing. What are
Yes.
some of the ways that you've been able to finance it?
So for our first beach house, we actually did a hard money lender for the construction portion, and then we
Okay,
refinanced.
for someone who doesn't know what that is, can you explain what a hard money lender is?
So kind of like it's a little bit like a loan shark. They just charge a higher rate. They don't have as many requirements. It's a short-term loan just during the construction or whatever your project is, and then you'd
Okay.
have to refinance it right, when it's done.
With a more traditional loan then,
With a
but like a bank
traditional,
is more apt to
yes,
take on, okay,
yes,
this is a built house versus a
yes,
construction loan.
yeah,
What would be the advantage of you said a hard money lender? I've never heard this before.
yes, yes.
What would be the advantage of that versus a construction loan?
I mean, it essentially is a construction loan, but I mean, you can get money in a couple weeks to start a project, and you
Oh,
just
wow.
don't have all these hoops to jump through. They want to look at your credit. You want to have good credit, but you don't
Yep.
have to have, a ton of money in the bank or be paying a ton down. Um, it's just a higher interest rate, and it's a shorter loan, so you have to have a plan for exit on that. But that's how we built our beach houses, because it was a little harder to get construction loans at that time. And for our cabins, it's been all about small local banks. So
Okay.
yeah, and then we just were really fortunate that we started buying long-term rentals when we did. So we were able to use some equity from those houses to pay forward and build new places.
Okay.
So
And then I'm guessing those
yes,
long-term rentals help to pay the monthly construction
yes,
loans as you're
yes,
building.
yeah,
Because that's the other tricky part. You can
yes,
get a construction loan, but then until you have revenue coming in, it's a scary time to
it
build.
is.
There's just
Yeah,
money out left and right, and nothing's coming in. But you
yes,
had money coming in from
yeah.
long-term rentals, then the
Mhm.
beach houses for this one.
Right. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend someone doing what we've done with, our cabin property in the past 3 years. I wouldn't recommend that they do what we've done if they didn't have something else in line to buffer them, because
Yeah.
it's always going to be more expensive and it's always going to take longer than you thought. You know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and at one point our builder called me and was like, "We're 25% over budget," and I'm like, my mind was blown, and it ended up being more than that in the end. So
Yep.
we've just become comfortable with risk, and we've
Yeah.
realized that there is a way to do it. There's always a way to do it.
Yeah.
And we've been frugal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is always a way to get creative and finance something. There's always someone willing to give people loans who are in good standing with their,
Right.
their credit and the way they live their lives. So,
Well, and at this point, you have a record of success, which I think helps a lot. If someone is like thinking about their first cabin build, I think this can be a bit trickier. But for those listening who might have one and are thinking about what comes next, I feel like this is really helpful.
yeah,
You do have something to show for like a concept of what it could look like and your
yeah,
ability to make it happen as the person who owns it.
yeah. But I mean,
Okay.
I just, to anyone who's wanting to build their first cabin, don't let that stop you. You've got to be smart about it, but fear in and of itself shouldn't stop you from achieving something that is a dream. If it's not a dream, if it's just for money, if it's just, that's different. But if it literally just felt like we were supposed to do this. And so
Yeah.
we bought a piece of land. We had no clue what we were doing. We'd never dug wells before or built anything on any slope whatsoever. So it's all a learning curve, and nobody knows what they're doing. Literally no one knows what they're doing. Almost no one when they start. And
Right.
that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a tricky question that I get asked a lot, and I always have like some sort of answer, but even as we're thinking about our next project, I'm finding myself in the same spot without an answer to this, which is like, Where did you start, specifically with Out of Bounds, when you were thinking, we want to build 4 cabins on a piece of land, to even run the numbers to calculate the risk and figure out, like, can we do this now or do we need to wait? It's like, do you find the piece of land and then have builders come in and quote out what the site work will be? What about wells? What about septic? Or do you run just general numbers first and then be like, okay, I think we can do this, and now I look for the land? How did you tackle that in terms of calculating kind of projected revenue along with projected expenses to figure out if it was doable?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of different, running lots of different scenarios. I mean, I kind of enjoy doing that. I nerd out about it, but it was running a ton of different scenarios, and we knew that we wanted to do at least 2 cabins. So it was looking for properties where we could subdivide or just do 2 cabins, if that certain county allowed. And then I used AirDNA a lot.
Yep.
I just scoured Airbnb for comparable properties, looked at their calendars, did estimates, and did like really
Mhm.
horrible estimates. That's the most important thing. Do horrible estimates. If you have an awful year and you're still breaking even on something, and estimating that it costs maybe 50% more than you think it's going to cost, with
Right.
half the revenue that you think it'll do. And if it still works, then it works.
Right.
And if
Right.
anything, you're
Running all the
still
scenarios.
building equity. You're still
Right.
building something that someone is going to want. As long as you love the area, you want to be there, it's not going to feel as scary or like work,
Yeah.
really.
It's interesting because when I was buying land for Cozy Rock, a friend of mine was looking at land in the mountains to build, and her realtor at the time told her there's no buildable land left. If it could be built on, someone would already have bought it. But this was probably about the same time that you were buying this land to build on in
Yeah.
Banner Elk. She was looking at Boone, Banner Elk, and Blowing Rock. So what has your experience been? I mean, I'm curious about that area in particular, just because it is becoming so saturated so quickly with cabins and rentals. Did you find that to be the case, or did you have lots of land to choose from?
No, I totally agree with her.
Really?
I feel like the best land is just privately held. People pay like a few $100 a year on taxes for it. They're just keeping it in the family.
Yeah.
And it'll slowly trickle to out of obscurity at some point. But yeah, I think the best land is probably not on the market, especially right now. But our land is pretty steep. So what we saved in land costs, we more than spent on, foundations,
Yeah.
roads,
Retaining walls.
drainage, yeah, I mean, we had a $10,000 retaining wall that was not in the
Yeah.
budget for Firefly Cabin. I mean, it was just like,
Yeah,
oh,
they're not
here's
cheap.
$10,000 right there, and so, it's just, it's you're not able to estimate everything. You just can't.
I
You
know.
just
That's the
gotta
hard part.
go with your gut.
I know, but even though I've been through that, that's still the hard and scary part, is like
Yeah.
septic, well, electric. Are you going to be able to tap into the grid? How much is that going to cost? How far are you going to have to dig for a well? Will
Hmm.
you be able to, septic is a little bit easier because you can perk test it before you like go in, but the well is like, I'm going to have no idea until you start drilling.
I mean, are you saying this because you've heard my well story?
No,
Oh
no,
my
we
gosh.
got lucky with our well, but my cousin
Uh,
had a horror story at the same time.
yeah. Um, we dug our well. The county told us exactly where we had to dig it, and we dug this well. It was 1,500 feet deep. There was no water, and we had to frack it. We got some water. We were like, woohoo, finally. Well, 10 days later,
Oh, I did hear this.
it was
It
dry.
ran dry.
So basically, it filled up one time. It was like the
And
most
that was it.
expensive drink of water I've ever had. It was like a huge blow. It took us a few days to recover from the shock of it. Um, because it was literally $40,000 down the drain.
Right.
And it's useless. It's
Right.
filling up slowly with condensation. So someone told me, but it's useless, and we just,
Yeah.
had to go find money to dig another well because we
Right.
have 4 houses to supply with water. So you need water.
Do you have one well for the 4 houses?
Yeah. So
How
far,
did you do that?
It's also a deep well. It's not as deep. I think it's like 800 or 900 feet. And then we have it a holding tank, a huge holding tank. So it fills up
Okay.
the tank, and then we dug, 4 foot deep trenches across the entire property, hundreds of feet. So it was a big undertaking. And that's why I kind of like recently, if when people ask me, I just say, maybe you can find a house that needs some love, that has really nice acreage. Number one, you get kind of a discount per acre on your acreage when you buy it with a house on it that no one
Yeah.
wants. And
Yep.
number two, you know that there's utilities there. So
Yeah. That's
that's
really good
where,
advice.
yeah. Or just, buy flatter land with city water, or, maybe it doesn't have city water, but there's really good wells around, and
Right.
you ask neighbors and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
ways
There's
to
just
do it,
so many
but
unknowns.
I think we did it the hard way in some ways. But
Yeah. And that's where I'm sure you get this all of the time. But when people pop into your DMs and they're like, what is the cost to build? And you're
yeah,
like, well, do I include the $40,000 non-functional well or do I leave
yes,
that
yeah,
out? Right. 'Cause, like, there's just no way to. And if you tell someone, here's how much it costs, and then they run into a 40,000 well issue, it's like, what if they don't
yeah,
have that money to cover that? And like, it's all very scary. To your original point, you have
yeah,
to be willing to embrace risk.
yeah, yeah. You do.
But okay, let's move a little bit from the risk to the rewards because you've been doing this for a while.
Hmm.
And I don't want people to listen to this podcast and be like, oh my God, I'm never building. I thought I wanted to,
No.
but I've changed my mind. I don't
Yes.
want
No,
to.
I don't want
So,
to portray that at all.
right. But also, it is helpful to be realistic because this is why
Yes.
that question is so hard to answer. And you can answer for your cabin, but it might not be for another one. But when did you launch the first couples cabin in Banner Elk? And what have you seen in terms of traction, reaction to it since you've done that?
So my strategy all along is that if I'm in the top 5 or 10% of, if I do the best that I can do and make it the best that I can make it, if I'm in the top 5 or 10% of the cabins in my area, then competition doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So my idea is to when a guest arrives at the cabin, they literally have zero to worry about that I can control.
Yeah.
And I think when you do that for people, it just allows them to be themselves and allows them to have those moments that you really, really want to give them. It means so much. And you, as a host, I'm sure feel exactly the same way. It feels amazing to be just like this tiny part of giving these people a place to make these memories
Yeah.
that mean a lot to them and have these moments with each other.
Yeah.
So we launched Firefly in last September roundabouts. Spent a couple months like hosting people, so we didn't have great occupancy in the beginning, but now we have a very good occupancy. We're hovering 80 to 90% a lot of months. Um,
I feel like it's worth noting. I'm going to add one thing here for people who don't know the Boone, Banner Elk, Blowing Rock area. It's a really popular tourist area year round for skiing,
mhm.
hiking, all of the things, which is great. It is also very saturated with cabins and it feels like it was one of the first, like that's how I discovered cabin culture 15 years ago was there. So it's not a new thing there, which I do think makes it harder. Like those numbers in a really saturated market aren't comparable to like if someone's getting 100, for
Yeah.
example, if I'm getting 100% occupancy in Freeport where there's like not a lot of competition at all for that kind of stay, you are competing with a lot of people. So I just want to give context to those numbers. When I hear
Yes.
that, I'm like, okay, that's really good considering how many cabins there are to choose from in that, area.
Right. Yeah, and I mean some months it's not that it just depends. Like late winter, early spring is not great there in general. But I just think the when you focus on the experience and being unique, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
You're gonna
Yeah.
you're gonna get a lot better traction over other cabins.
One thing that you said really stuck out to me, which is like, I do everything I can, everything that's within my control to make sure their experience is really good. And I feel the same way, but I also find it very exhausting and anxiety inducing because I then go to the extreme of like, well, everything is within my control. And if something goes wrong for a guest, then it is my fault and my responsibility to fix it. How do you handle, and I only have 3 cabins and you are managing more than that and growing. How do you manage that part of the job of running so many different properties?
I think I just accept that some things are going to happen, and it's,
Yeah.
things that that aren't in your control to, think ahead on every single item. But I think that your response to the guests when things happen is the most important thing. If you convey to them how much it truly means to you that you did not meet your expectation of yourself, I think they excuse things, and they know things
Right.
happen. I think if you don't respond quickly
Yeah.
and, appropriately, then that's when they get, not as understanding.
Yeah.
So,
And I think sometimes I take it for granted the people that I tend to talk to in the rental world are very responsible hosts. And so I feel like if it took me an hour to respond, that's way too long. And then my twin sister was at a rental this past weekend with a bunch of friends. And of course, she's sending me updates about what happens with the rental. Like, oh, there's labels everywhere here and there's this here. And the septic overflowed into the basement. Now,
ooh,
they did get the
oh,
plumber there very quickly, but they didn't offer any sort of discount or even respond to her messages. They just sent a plumber. And I was like, okay, this feels like a big one. Like septic, there is
yeah.
poop all over the
Oh
basement.
no.
Like my
Yeah.
biggest fear.
Oh no. Yeah, that's a big one. It definitely comes in like respond appropriately and immediately. And that's when,
Yeah.
a phone call is just warranted in some of the
Yes.
instances,
Agreed.
because they can't really always understand your intentions. So
That's right.
sometimes I do, breach the phone call area, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you have to relax about it and just, you're not going to get all 5-star reviews all the time. I mean, that's the goal. And some people do for like years, but I don't know. I think there's going to be sometimes when things happen. So,
I agree. And I actually think
yeah.
getting that first 4-star review or whatever it might be is like actually pretty important to let you let go. Because until
Yeah.
you get that first one, you're obsessing about every one of them. And once you get it and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, people are still booking, life has moved
Yeah.
on, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I feel like that actually is really helpful.
Because I think in your other reviews, your intention will shine through.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can always reply to that review really politely. And that's going to be more important than the actual review, is like they're going to read and see how you replied to it. So, like, almost everything is overcomable, I feel like, if you have the right attitude. Now, that said, are you in any Airbnb Facebook groups?
No, I really try not to go on Facebook at all. I actually don't like to be on social media at all. But I have to be on Out of Bounds on Instagram
Yeah.
so much that I don't really go on any other social media.
Okay, this is a good transition because I do want to ask you about your social media. What role, because I don't think you're on social media for your beach houses, are you?
I mean, not really. They have a page, but yeah.
Okay,
Not,
that's how 2 of mine are. Cozy Rock's the one where I spend all my time.
yeah.
So that tells me that when you were building Out of Bounds, you thought specifically about social media in a different way than you had in the past.
Oh, yeah.
How early did you think about that? What was your thought process about the strategy that you wanted to take there versus what you were doing at the beach houses?
I feel like there's nothing like showing a guest what type of experience they're going to have.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it, like how they would see that on Instagram, on Reels, these videos, and that people put out with their cabins to give you like that true feeling and
Mhm.
imagine yourself in that place, right?
Right. Right.
For the beach rents in the summer. It just rents. Although this year quite a bit slowly, more slowly
Really?
than other years. But I mean,
Huh.
that's like everyone. Everybody's booking
Yeah.
last minute this year. But for the cabins, we really wanted to give people the opportunity to book direct with us. So I knew that I had to get that social media to a place where people could find it there.
Yeah.
Um, we love Airbnb. We use Verbo. I'll just say
I
a
feel the
little
same
bit.
way.
Not really. I mean, Airbnb's kicking their butt. Let's just
Yes.
put it out there. But
Agreed. Yes.
Airbnb has its place, and it's been amazing, and it's helped us, and we've obviously helped them too. But I think there's a lot to be said for, having the freedom of having your own booking site and also just passing savings on to the guests, because we don't want to charge them more
Right.
than we need to charge them.
Right.
We really don't. So that gives them some savings, and the social media aspect is important to just have people find it. That's the only way people find our website.
Yeah.
And I think we're around if you average all of our rentals, we're probably around between 20 and 30% direct bookings just from our Instagram.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
been really important.
So how involved were you I don't know if that's the right word. How aware of, like, I always call it the cabin porn world on like Instagram before you started the account for Out of Bounds? And like, what was your strategy? How were you going to make your cabin stand out amidst what's becoming like a more crowded place full of cabins? I still think it's not that crowded. I just think we feel like it is because we all
Yeah,
follow
right.
each other. So I think that's
Yes.
worth saying
Yeah.
that to the
It's
average
true.
traveler, it doesn't feel crowded.
Yeah, yeah,
But
it's true.
it does feel intimidating a little bit to enter now because it's like, okay, how do I make mine different? Did you have any thoughts or strategy on like what you wanted to do with yours that would be a bit different? Because you have like 85,000 followers. You've obviously done a really good job. So I think this is important to dig into a little bit because there's
Yeah.
probably some takeaways for other people.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't know anything I'd never made a reel before. I didn't know anything about Instagram really, because I had an Instagram, but I only posted on it like my kids' pictures maybe once every 6 months. So
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about it. So I kind of started from scratch and just played around with it. But I knew initially in the very beginning that the videography, in fact, was going to be the most important thing. And so I set a budget for myself. I had to convince my husband to get on board with that budget, but I made sure to hire people that could show the true feeling of being at our properties. So,
Yeah.
and they did amazing. Those, sort of like cinematic, beautiful videos really are what catches people's eyes
Yes.
the most. And that's probably how our page has gotten seen the most.
Yep.
But it's definitely time consuming. It's sometimes I just got to put it away, but my goal was to post at least 5 days a week using, the little tactics that people teach on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube or wherever. I would ask people for advice, but I also used it to just make connections and
Yeah.
make friends with other cabin owners, because they are an amazing community. So if you're wanting to build a cabin or you're wanting to Airbnb your cabin, start reaching out to other owners, because I feel like, number one, I think we often have similar personalities. So I think we connect on different things that maybe other people wouldn't.
Yep.
As far as, hosting and just the dream of having a cabin and how the feeling of it. But number two, because I think they're very open and genuinely willing to help people
Yes.
who are starting out, which,
Yep.
I've helped some people have helped me. And yeah, so I knew I needed to kind of get involved with the community, and that has been really fun because I've made some
Yeah.
really good friends on there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, agreed. And what I always tell people in cabin consultations is like, it doesn't have to be social media. If you like social media, then that is a really good marketing channel for you to use. And for me, I really enjoy it for the reasons you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy for me to go all in there. And I don't do a whole lot of other marketing. Have you explored any other different forms of marketing besides social media? And obviously Airbnb and VRBO, who do marketing for us. Is there anything else that you do?
No, that's it.
Interesting.
And it kind of has to do with time and just like
Yeah.
where I truly think that my time will be the best spent. And I think it's there. So
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wish I had better answers for people. I'm like flirting with the idea of trying different ones just so that I can be like, this worked, this worked. Because I'm always like, you don't have to use social media, but that is primarily the only thing that we use.
right.
And we don't do heavy email marketing. We just open our calendar that way. And I am
Yeah.
curious if there's other places, even like Pinterest, if people are finding success there, because I know, but I feel like if you pursue Pinterest, you're going to get more people who just want to build a cabin like yours
Yes.
versus come stay at your cabin.
Yeah, 100%.
I could be wrong. I mean, and that's what Instagram's become for us too. Like this is why I always say, I don't think you need 100,000+ followers, because sometimes you're reaching the wrong audience. If who you want are travelers, you could have 5,000 of
Yes.
the right
Yep.
ones and fill your calendar. It's just about being strategic with who you're directing your content to.
Yeah. And it's the content. I think that's the number one thing. It's the content. Is it beautiful? Does it draw the people in who see it? I mean, does it make you stop and watch
Right.
it? Right. So
Right. Do you have any shout outs of people that you've worked with that you really love? Because I get this question a lot too, and I only know the folks that I've worked with.
yeah. Journey Moore just came back to Skywatch Cabin.
Okay.
They're I probably purchased the most videography from them. I think
Okay.
their content is amazing. We've worked with Ethan Abbott's. We've worked with Caleb Jones. Did
Yeah.
all of our listing photos. We just worked with Dippin' Out again, and
Okay.
it's
I've never
everybody.
heard of them.
Yeah, everybody offers something unique. And
Yeah.
then there's smaller people who we work with. I'm so excited because Dirt and Glass they're coming in August, and I did not think that we would get them to come to our properties, but I'm so excited to see what they do because they did
Yeah.
some pretty unique stuff. But um, it's not cheap. I have people who ask me what should I do for my listing, and I suggest that they take professional pictures,
Yeah.
and then they don't, and you know that's number one. That's just number one.
I
So
totally agree
if
with
you
you.
wanted to be
And
successful, so
And once you own a rental, anytime I'm like booking travel for my friends, I'm so picky about what I'm looking for. First of all, like my tastes have gone up a lot, which is problematic because my bank account is not large enough to support it. But
yeah,
when you're surrounded by all these cool cabins, you're like, well, that's what I want to stay in. But the second
yeah,
piece, I think sometimes the ones I'm seeing might be really cool. They're just not photographed well. And it's like,
yeah,
damn, like
exactly,
what a disservice. A good
right,
photographer could totally change this for you.
yeah,
And especially in a crowded market, it feels really valuable. Because if you look at cabins in Boone, Banner Elk, and Blowing Rock, there's a ton of them. But if you scour Airbnb, the amount that take marketing and photography seriously, I'm sure it's grown since I started like 9 years ago, but it still is. You don't see ones like yours very often in the way that it's captured, in the way that it's shared.
yeah.
And I think that just becomes even more important if you are in a market where you have to like really stand out.
Well, you could have kind of an average cabin that's well done, but it looks like a lot of other cabins. But if you have someone with the eye to help the person looking on Airbnb to see themselves in that cabin and to just notice
Yeah.
the little details and just to convey the feeling that they will feel when they're there, that's the most important, right? I mean, it could be
Yeah.
a cabin like 100 other cabins, but that's going to catch people's eye and you're going to get booked quicker.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. Okay, I want to ask a non-sexy question that I'm always interested in, but like you're managing so many builds at once while also hosting. Talk to me a little bit about like how you organize all of that. Especially let's start with the builds because that's over. I mean, I did one cabin
Yeah.
at a time and had intense organization system. So what does that look like for you to manage like okay, I'm subdividing lots over here, but I'm doing finishing touches over here. Okay, I'm doing a driveway here. How do you manage all those pieces so that things don't get lost?
Um, Probably not very well. It's what it feels like anyway, because I have like kids home all the time too. But
Right, and you're
um,
homeschooling.
yeah, and I'm homeschooling. I feel like I'm not good at that at all. But I make sure, like my number one is that I make sure I work with people I don't have to babysit because
Yeah,
I just can't manage myself and babysit other people. So that
yeah.
is like my top thing. So my
Okay, but that's
cleaner,
so common
everybody.
that people have to be babysat. So
Yeah.
how do you screen? Do you have any tips for screening for people who don't require babysitting? Especially
I
in the
mean,
mountains where it feels like
I just don't work with them again if I
yeah,
end
okay.
up having to babysit them. I just, um, other than that, I don't feel that I can give great advice about that because I don't think I'm that organized because I need sort of like to be under the gun to really get things done.
Yeah.
Like I just, before this call, was prepping a little bit because I figured you'd probably ask me about like costs and stuff, and I had never gone through our invoices completely. So I had to do that. But I mean, Yes,
Okay, and I didn't ask you about cost. We should take
yeah.
advantage of that. Would you like to talk about cost?
Yeah, I'm willing to talk about cost. I
Okay,
don't want
because
to scare
most
anybody
people are not.
off though. That's the thing. Because our what we've done could have been done less expensively if number one, if we knew what we were doing, and now we feel like we know a little bit more. So hopefully we don't make some of the same mistakes. Um, but also because our area is just so expensive. I mean, I'll throw out one thing. This is just one
Okay.
thing. Our cabin Firefly is 650 square feet.
Okay.
The cost, the painter for the inside, and this was not even staining the ceiling because someone else stained
Oh,
the
I
ceiling.
saw this number. You shared it
Yes,
somewhere.
it was like over $11,000. It was like $11,600. I could not believe it, and I thought I could have gone to paint. It's not even that much sheetrock. I mean, it's not even that much, but it is literally. It was so hard to get people to come to a tiny job.
Yeah.
They're just, and they have these huge multi-million-dollar homes that are like, I'll pay you $20,000 if you show up at my house this week. So people didn't want to come to our little tiny
Yeah.
jobs. They just didn't. And so that was, I think, more expensive because of that. But also there's just so few subs there. People are starting to bring in subs from out of state because it's much cheaper to bring someone in. It's like, you could pay half the cost to bring someone in from Florida
And
and
like
pay
house
their
them
room
for a
and
week?
board and everything.
Huh.
Um, there's just, the demand is high, so it's expensive.
Yeah.
And the
Okay,
materials,
give us an overview of some of the other costs. That one's very helpful. And it
yeah,
makes me, as much as I hated painting our cabin, we drove through the night and painted straight for 4 days
yeah.
and then drove through the night back and
And I'm
wanted to
sure it was worth
die.
it.
Yeah. But now I hear that number and I don't even
Yeah,
know what the number would have been. We didn't even get a quote. We were always just like, this is the one thing that we can actually do. So we will
right.
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What are some of the other ballpark numbers? Just because it's so rare that someone's willing to like give any idea and it's the number one thing that people want to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah. So keeping in mind that we had things like a $10,000 retaining wall that we didn't know we were going to have to do. We had a spring up under our foundation at Firefly that we had to spend money to divert. We had the well that failed. We had, just all these different things. And also some things that could have been controlled had I known like the cost of them ahead of time, but it was hard to
Right.
get quotes and I could have picked something, that those are like things that I could have controlled if I'd known ahead of time. But Firefly cost us over 400,000 to build,
Okay.
and Skywatch was like over 330, I want to say,
Okay.
and
So that was the second one. So that's
that's cabin
important
two.
information
Yeah.
to your point of being able the second time around, being able to cut that number down by almost 70K.
Well, it actually ended
Okay.
up
Give me
being
more
more per
context.
square foot, but Firefly also absorbed like the grading of of
That's true. Because it was
the
the first.
second cabin's driveway and the septic because they share a
Okay.
septic.
Okay.
So we definitely didn't necessarily lower costs on the second one just because it's the same amount of bathrooms, it's the same amount of HVAC, it's the same
Yeah.
amount of plumbing and electrical work and stuff. It's just a smaller footprint, so we probably could have built a little bit bigger for almost the
Yeah.
same cost.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't even know if at this point if we could like refinance for, we don't, there's like no comps for these. So, I mean, we
And
don't need to, but yeah, there's
I
like,
hear you though, because when I look at our portfolio and I try and figure out like where are we at,
yeah,
Cozy Rock is the one outlier
yeah,
because it's a custom build. It cost us almost the same as what you're saying, and it's a 1-bedroom cabin,
yeah,
technically.
yeah,
And so it's like, but the thing that's not being accounted for in that I've recently learned is more valuable on the last episode, folks will know what I'm talking about. But if you were to sell the value of the Instagram, your email list, so the person we talked to last week, his Instagram was valued at $2 million in terms of the bill, in terms of the sale.
wow,
And so I can see that from an investor, it's like guaranteed traffic coming to the cabin, but that's not going to show up on Zestimate. So it's not
right.
necessarily going to show up if you're trying to refinance or like use that. Anyway, it gets very complicated.
Yeah, we have a very long-term goal. We actually regret selling any property we've ever sold.
Yeah.
So we actually don't plan on selling anything ever. So we have a very long-term mindset with everything. So
Yeah.
it's fine. Like it pays for itself. They're paying for future builds. We're rolling that in. So it's fine. was it a shock? It was like such a shock. I won't even tell you the number that we actually thought we would be able to build for in the beginning, because it's like silly. Like, I
Okay, but
laugh
I'll
at
tell you what people told me. I asked that question and I was told 200 a square foot. And
it.
so I saw that you ended at like 600 a square foot,
Yeah,
which is not
more.
that dissimilar to Cozy Rock,
Right,
because I think we finished at like 450 total for
right,
the whole build, including, I think that includes land. I'd have to look at mine. But anyway, and it was like 3 times. And that's why I kind of hesitate to share build costs sometimes. Although sharing the high end is almost helpful, because on the other
yeah,
end, it's just like you don't want someone to hear that and go in with that expectation. And then you really are potentially financially upside down
right, right.
or just shocked and like, okay, that's not where we were supposed to
Right.
be.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to scare anybody off. I think, buy the spend the most that you're able to spend on flatter land, right?
Yeah.
So put your money into flatter land. That's going to help your build costs 100%. If you can do some of the work, if you can act as your GC, for us, we've never built, I mean, we haven't built on our own before, so we kind of needed a GC. We could do things on our own somewhat, but because the land is steep, we don't know what we don't know. So we needed,
Right.
we needed people who knew what they were doing, especially the A-frame is on these huge pilings. And I
And you don't want to
mean,
mess around with that. That's like the
no,
structural
no,
integrity of the
need
cabin.
anything falling down the mountain. So,
Yeah.
so it's well
Wait,
worth,
okay.
that includes all the GC costs and stuff too. So.
Yep. Okay, let's go on the flip side of this though again. Do you have projections for year 1 and what you estimate you will be able to bring in the first full year of renting? Firefly is the one that's almost at a year, right? In September it'll be a year.
Yes. I actually haven't done that.
Okay.
But I mean, I feel like that is so dependent on your area, and also dependent on what type of cabin you build.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're doing small couples cabins because we
Yep.
feel like they're the highest ROI
Yep.
on most anything.
Mhm.
Anything that's in our wheelhouse anyway. But, our A-frame we're building because we want our own place to go. I mean, we fit in Firefly, but not very well. So,
Yeah.
we want that to be a place where our family gathers. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I do think, because my first cabin was a large one that can fit, it's like 2,500 square feet and can sleep 10 to 12 people. And I thought that was the dream, because I was like, I can host all my friends and we would always go to the cabin or go to the
Mm-hmm.
mountains. But then after building Cozy Rock, now Cozy Rock was expensive because it was a custom build, but it is still the profit that we make on that relative to a big one, which we actually, and again, different markets. So to your point, it really
Yeah.
depends on the market. I don't think I would ever build a big one at this point. I don't think I would ever build one that sleeps more than 2 people at this point, because it's so much less wear and tear.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The guests are
For
great.
sure.
There's so many more couples out there versus groups of 10 to 12 who are trying to come together. And to your point, they can always rent multiple of your cabins if they want to.
Yes. And I don't want to be intentionally vague about, potential revenue, but I also think in a way it's not helpful when you don't know someone's costs, because I mean our monthly costs are pretty high.
Right. Right.
And we pay our cleaner really well,
Yeah.
because we want to have a relationship where she'll do everything for us, and we always want her to feel super valued and
Yep.
like she's more than compensated for whatever we do she does with us. So
Yeah.
it feels like disingenuous a little bit to really, not that I'm gatekeeping numbers, it just feels like, to say numbers without saying like the true costs. I mean, everything's going out right now because we're
I know.
building more, but you have to do your own costs and for your area, what your revenue could be, and then what your cost would be for your area. So,
And how much do you want to use it? Because Cozy Rock's numbers are an
mhm.
interesting one for me, because we do pretty well, but we go up almost once a month.
Yeah,
And we're
right.
switching to like maybe every other month, but for a full week. And that's a lot of revenue that we give up when we
Yes.
go up. Totally worth it to us. But that plays with our numbers. If I were to share and I'm happy to share our numbers, but if I were to do that, it's with that big caveat of like,
Yeah.
okay, we go up these days. We also block off a fair amount for photographers, to your point, because it's
Yes.
really valuable in marketing. Well, that's income that's lost that, you might have different priorities. And so you might be able to bring in more or less. similar to build costs. There's so many different variables.
Well, and then when you hear people's numbers, there's so much that can go into those numbers. You know, like, are they true just? Are they net numbers? Are they just rent, or are the people including, you know, everything that they bring in and stuff they have to pay out, like occupancy taxes and their cleaning? So if you go on AirDNA, I've noticed that the numbers on AirDNA, for people who look on that to try to project true, like, numbers for an entire year of rental, I've noticed that I'm like 100% positive that those numbers actually include the occupancy taxes and the cleaning, any type of fees
So
that the
it's
person
just
is
gross.
paying in.
None of that is taken out.
I don't think it's that accurate. That's why I think you just really have to do your own numbers for your own situation and find somebody who's willing to help you figure out how to do that if you don't. I think there are plenty of people willing to help with that. So.
Right. But I'm reminded, being deep in it now and thinking about, are we ready to do another project? I'm reminded how much math there is, because it's like I have different tabs for everything from like land possibilities, which are all over the board, to like build possibilities, materials, labor, to then furnishing possibilities. Am I hiring an interior designer? Am I doing it myself? Do I want to shop at like thrift stores? Because I really like the idea of doing like cabins with more personality. But you can't calculate those numbers. You have no idea how much the right like overhead light is going to be from a thrift store versus Target. You can calculate that, but that's not quite the vibe I'm going for. So I'm so deep in it now that I'm like remembering how hard it is in that stage to know. And I've done it before. I just can't imagine how folks listening who've never done it before feel. It's just all unknown.
And that's where you've just got to say, is this something that I feel compelled to do? And if it is, then how do we get there? And there's going to be unknowns. There's just going to be unknowns. And that's okay.
Yeah. Because I still see construction photos on Instagram and my body has like a physical response to it. So I'm like, ooh, is that information about whether I'm ready to do this?
But it's exciting too, right? And
I know.
You've got to work on that fear, I guess.
Yeah. It's exciting. And I know that not everybody out there, like I am lucky that, I inherited money that allowed us to do our first one and our second one. And then those have worked to allow us to think about another one. And I know that there are lots of people out there who love cabins and cabin culture and are not at a place to build their own yet. And so I do really feel driven by how do we create truly unique spaces that allow everybody access to that experience that we're able to have if we're able to build our own, but that might not be the reality for everyone. And or they might be able to afford it and don't want to. They just want to go once a year, and that's great too, right? But how do we share this experience that we feel compelled by if we have the drive to build these and share them? Yeah. Jandy, thank you so much for chatting with me. I followed you for so long and it was really exciting to meet the human behind all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I'm so excited to finally meet you too. Hopefully we can meet in person one day.
Thanks so much for joining us. And if you liked what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcast. If you have feedback or suggestions for the future, you can also find me on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin. Looking forward to next week.